Murtagh by Christopher Paolini. Murtagh is a young adult fantasy novel and is set as a continuation of the Aragon series, if you happen to be familiar with that was originally written by Christopher Paolini back about 20 years ago. This book is following the titular character Murtagh and his dragon Thorn after the events of the Aragon Quartet. And so going into this, admittedly, I didn't know this book was out until I had suddenly saw it on bookshelves. And so going into this, I went into it with some mixed emotions because while I really love the book Aragon, the first book, as the series went on, it kind of felt like it dragged on, and I wasn't overly fond of the final book. And so I wasn't necessarily sure going into this whether I was actually going to enjoy it or not. When the book first started, I struggled with it. It was a bit of a slog to get through the beginning. However, once the book got going and really started moving along, I found myself genuinely enjoying it. Hence why I'm doing this video to begin with, right? But at the same time, I feel like the one caveat I really need to go into is this book is just way too long. Like seriously, look at this spine. It is like over 600 pages. What is it? 665 pages long. And it could have been maybe 400 and we would be okay. And not to get on my soapbox or anything like that, but I feel like this is a bit of an issue with fantasy novels in general, especially when they're young adult or adult fantasy novels, is that they just drag on for a lot longer than they have any right to be. Even if they're really, really good. Whether it's things like Name of the Wind or the Game of Thrones or just any of those sorts of big series, I feel like it's an issue where they just are not edited enough. Whether it's because it's sort of the genre itself, or whether it's an issue with these authors who have gotten really big and the editors just feel like, well, that I'm not going to cut anything from them. It's just too long. Like, there were genuinely a few moments where I'm like, do I really want to continue if the rest of the book is going to be like this? Which is a shame because, like I said, by the end of it, by the time I finish this book, I've walked away with it with a very positive impression. It's just, it is very long. Stepping away from that complaint, though, the one thing I really want to focus on is the maturity of Christopher Paolini's writing. And what I mean by that is the fact that it's been 20 years since Aragon was first published. Christopher Paolini, he's now 40 years old. He was a teenager when he wrote Aragon. And so part of my concern coming into this was I was a little worried that this book was going to be like grim dark compared to the rest of the Aragon books. That maybe he would be trying to throw in like exorbitant sex scenes or, make it obscenely more violent than the other books. And he didn't do that. Instead, Murtagh very much feels tonally that it is part of the Aragon series. And I really appreciated that because that to me spoke a little bit of just the maturity of Christopher Paolini recognized, okay, this is the Aragon series. He's going to keep to that sort of tone, keep to that sort of vibe in general. But at the same time, the book does show a lot more maturity than the Aragon series in general. And I think a lot of this has to do with the protagonist. Murtagh is not Aragon by any means. The book does kind of like to push that a lot of reminding you, like, yep, I'm not, like, he kind of keeps thinking, well, I'm not Aragon. But there's good reason for that. Murtagh is, in the Aragon series, the titular character Aragon was a bit of a Gary Stew. He was pretty much always right, no matter what he did. He picked up on skills, whether it was swordplay or magic, very quickly, like far more quickly than any person had any right to. And just, he was pretty much always in the morally right. And Murtagh is not like that. Murtagh and Thorn are both coming away from this series with some serious trauma that they're having to deal with, and it actually informs their characters and causes them to make mistakes and causes them to mess up in ways that Aragon and Saphira never would have. They're not as powerful as Aragon and Saphira. Murtagh is not very good magically. He's a good fighter, but in terms of the magic, he's not as just immediately picking up and doing things as well as Aragon ever did. And as a result of that, the story actually feels like it has a proper place here. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're just continuing to write an adventure where someone just goes along and does whatever they want. There's actual consequences for when they mess up, and that actually I really enjoyed. In summary, Murtagh is a good book. If you read the Aragon series and enjoyed it, I guarantee you will enjoy this one because it just continues to show some depth that the Aragon series maybe didn't quite go into. If you read the Aragon series and really enjoyed it to the start, but then maybe kind of grew out of it a little bit like I did, I think you will still enjoy Murtagh because while, yes, it is still overlong, it definitely should be shorter. It is also good, and it goes in a different direction than the Aragon Quartet ever did. And personally, for me, I liked that. If you are a fan of fantasy novels and maybe haven't read the Aragon series before, this is a book where you will need to have read the Aragon series really to understand what happened, because there's a lot of references to the things that happened in the quartet, and you wouldn't necessarily have a good idea of the relationship between Murtagh and Thorn, his dragon, or just a lot of the other characters that are involved in the story. And so, in general, great book. Maybe need to do some reading, maybe needs to have some editing, but overall, good book.